Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing a brief analysis of the poem V by Tony Harrison. As you're probably aware, some of the language in the poem is quite profane, so please do be warned. If you are a student, feel free to adopt any of the ideas from this video in your essays. I've always been opposed to the dissection of poetry for academic purposes, so I'm always happy to help students with their essays. I did a reading of this poem in its entirety, so I'll put a link to the reading in the description. If you've got a spare 25 minutes and you want to hear someone read the poem out loud, click the link in the description. So, V by Tony Harrison is one of the most controversial works in modern English poetry. It was actually banned from the airwaves for years. Ostensibly, this was due to the coarse language and racial epithets, but many believe that the theme of bitter class conflict worried members of the establishment. Most of the poem's opponents were wealthy conservatives who felt that the poem's polemical tone sent a dangerous message to ordinary Britons. At the time the poem was written, which was, I believe, 1985, Britain was riven by class conflict between the working class, who were bolstered by strong unions and tight-knit communities, and the rich ruling class that sought to divide and conquer them. Class conflict, of course, is one of the prominent themes in V. This is stated quite openly in the line, "Class v class, as bitter as before, the unending violence of us versus them." Now, us could mean us, the working class, or could potentially be seen from the point of view of the ruling class. But this is the class conflict Harrison was referring to: working class, poor British people versus the wealthy ruling class. At the time of writing, in the mid-80s, coal miners across Britain were on strike, defending their livelihoods, while the Conservative government, led by Margaret Thatcher, made a concerted effort to crush the miners and their unions at all costs. Thatcher wanted to create a kind of atomized society of striving individuals motivated purely by greed and self-interest. So the idea of a strong, united working class was anathema to everything Thatcher believed in. And the increasing power of the working class, which was exhibited in the 70s and early 80s, was very dangerous to Thatcherism. There's a line in the poem that refers to Coal-Board McGregor in the NUM. Now, when I first read the poem, I had to look this up. Ian McGregor was the controversial boss of the National Coal Board throughout the mid-80s. He was an industrialist, a very rich industrialist, and he was largely regarded as a pro-establishment bulldog hired by Thatcher to crush the miners, who are the NUM, the National Union of Mine Workers. The theme of class warfare leads on to Tony Harrison exploring his feelings of alienation from his working class roots. Tony Harrison was born in Leeds in 1937 to a working class family and grew up in Leeds before attending Leeds Grammar School and Leeds University. His education and talent took him to London. Everyone at the time who was talented had to go to London to make a name for themselves, where he became a celebrated literary figure. Like many working class kids of the era, Harrison's grammar school and university education allowed him to move up to the middle class. So a small number of working class people, if they had the brains and the talent, could go to grammar school, then uni, and then move allegedly up to the middle class. However, his new middle class pretensions clashed with his parents' solidly working class beliefs that he was raised with. He imagines a conversation with his father. So what's a creed of cook, cunt? Can't you speak the language your mum spoke? Think of her. So Tony Harrison's father's saying, well, why do you speak posh, basically? As an expression of working class feeling, the theme of work, of course, features heavily in the poem. On the subject of work, the occupations listed on the tombs, like butcher, baker, publican, held in contrast with the poet's own occupation of bard. These men of the past performed a useful, practical function for their community, while a poet offers mere words. It seems to convey an anxiety about his middle-class occupation and whether his writing really offers any practical value in the real world. The line, "I'll tell you then what really riles a bloke. It's reading on their graves the jobs they did. Butcher, publican and baker. Me, I'll croak, doing the same nout I do now as a kid," which is ostensibly spoken by an unemployed malcontent, but it could be an expression of Harrison's own feelings of kind of impractical uselessness of a life in academia. As well as exploring the theme of work, the poem also explores the absence of work, the lack of gainful employment which afflicted huge portions of the British working class, especially in the industrial north like Leeds. The line, "Death after life on dole won't seem as hard," is a particularly plaintive expression of the hopelessness experienced by the unemployed. Tony Harrison imagines the unemployed malcontent skinhead having to pipe up to St. fucking Peter, "I've been on dole all my life in fucking Leeds," which conjures up an image of a man sort of summing up his life, just living on the dole in Yorkshire. Harrison dryly remarks about the graves, "What about the cunts who lieth here that were unemployed?" And he's saying, I think in a sense, that's appealing for all unemployed people. He also imagines a confrontation with the skinhead who defaced his parents' grave. Of course, that's a key point in the poem. Tony Harrison visits the cemetery in Beeston in Leeds, and you find that his parents' grave has been desecrated. Now, this actually happened. This was true. Harrison arrived at the cemetery. His parents' grave had been vandalised and graffitied. And this whole poem stemmed from that kind of shock and grief at what had happened. So he imagines confronting the skinhead. Now, the skinhead seems to represent the kind of impotent, misdirected working class anger. The skinhead ridicules Harrison's poofy words, which was an old homophobic term. You don't really hear it much anymore, thankfully. And ridicules his aspirations, protesting that folk on dole have as much to aspire to as coal aspires to be dumped on fire. Of course, the word aspires here is used in, terms of aspiration, which the Conservatives did and still do talk about. At the time of writing, Britain was transitioning from an industrial to a post-industrial economy, and thousands of young men in industrial towns were either made redundant or never got the opportunity to work at all. Many of them spent years or even their entire adult lives claiming benefits, which was largely regarded, of course, as a waste of youth and talent. The churlish skinhead espouses a virulent anti-intellectualism. He said, "A book is not worth a fuck." I think that rhymes in a Yorkshire accent, not mine. So yeah, the skinhead, he's an anti-intellectual. He's angry, anti-intellectual, and he's ridiculing Tony Harrison's pretentious, academic language. His Greek, his Latin. And that seems to represent the kind of working class person within his own mind, ridiculing his new middle class ideals that he learned at university and grammar school. Racism, it's a big theme in the poem. Racism runs through the poem like a cold seam. The graves in the cemetery have been vandalised with racist graffiti, which I'm not going to repeat in the video. You can see it in the actual poem, which is available freely online, the actual slurs. But the slurs refer to blacks, Pakistanis and Jews. Harrison's use of these racial epithets caused some controversy at the time, but really, when he asks, what is it that these crude words are revealing, he's clearly voicing his condemnation of their xenophobic feeling, as he puts it. He's not, advocating the usage of these terms. Harrison describes the vanishing, ethnically homogenous world of his father's generation and how it's being replaced by a new cultural world, a new multicultural world, So, his father grew up in an ethnically homogenous purely white English world where everybody was white English and they all spoke the same, looked the same, believed the same things. But of course, as we all know, in the 60s and 70s, new waves of immigration came into Britain, and the white working class communities sometimes changed overnight. His father's fear of foreign food and faces, marvellous alliteration there, when he smelt curry in the shop where he'd bought beer. Now, while people of our generation might see that kind of xenophobia as like narrow-minded and shameful, Harrison was given voice to the undeniable feelings of an entire generation of people in the industrial northern towns that saw their entire world change in just a few years due to forces seemingly beyond their control. A pensioner in turban taps his stick along the pavement past the corner shop that sells samosas now, not beer on tick, to the Kashmir Muslim club that was the Co-op. Harrison's father seems to represent the kind of aging white working class male, bewildered by the changes around him. It appears that Harrison's mother died first, leaving his father a widower. So the poem conjures up the kind of pathetic image of his father buying baked beans from a checkout girl too tired to smile or swap a joke with sad old geezers. His father's visit to the corner shop to buy cigarettes is his week's one and only conversation, which is characteristic of the social isolation experienced by many older people in modern Britain. Going back to the racism thing, the skinhead essentially represents the very right-wing racist national front, which was resurgent at the time. There was a huge movement of fascism, basically, in response to these radical changes, in response to unemployment. And the skinhead really represents that, and of course the racial epithets are scrawled across the graves. So the word united pops up a lot. I think the word united is used nearly every paragraph. It's used as a refrain throughout the poem, and it's usually an ironic refrain, considering how divided Britain was becoming at the time, divided by class, divided by race, divided by generations. These seemingly insolent youngsters vandalised and graffitied the grand old buildings and memorials of the past. In the surrounding of the graveyard, of course, the theme of death is ever present and inescapable. Harrison distinguishes the dead according to their profession, butcher, publican and baker, yet he speculates how they could all be thrown together in the pit if the old mine works beneath the cemetery collapse, causing the distinguished dead to drop into the rabblement of bone and rot. Short, a slack, crushed shell and smashed prop, which is essentially the old mine works beneath the graveyard, and Harrison speculates how it could all just collapse into the old mines. He mentions a rich banker with a huge obelisk, with room below left blank for his descendants. However, his descendants presumably moved away and never returned, which leaves the rather melancholy image of a huge gravestone with small writing at the top but a huge blank space underneath for the family who had forgot about this rich banker. The intrinsic dignity of the dead is violated by vandalism and graffiti. The solemn inscriptions in Latin and from the Bible stand in stark contrast with the four-letter swear words and racial epithets sprayed onto them by the vandal. As Harrison heaped coal onto his fire at home, and coal's a big theme in the poem, he contemplates how coal is just perished vegetation. What was lush swamp club moss and tree fern 300 million years ago is now providing heat for his home, which harkens back to prehistoric times. Harrison also ponders the afterlife, even though he states quite clearly that he doesn't believe in the afterlife at all. He supposes that his father hoped from the beyond a better life than this one with his mother. Harrison looks at the word united and fancifully imagines the word united meaning his parents are at last united in heaven. Love emerges as quite a secondary theme in the poem. subordinate to the greater themes like class conflict, work, and death. The love between a man and a woman is not romanticized at all in this poem. Harrison describes his working marriage, man versus wife, where the main advantage is that he can fuck and save his soul, which is all marriage seems to mean to him in this poem, although he might just be being ironic and cynical. Harrison's wife, who isn't named, she's just termed my woman, is given little description beyond the fact that she approaches his bedside naked. Harrison seems to show more feeling for the disaffected youth, the poem being a cri de coeur, cry from the heart, expressing empathy and understanding for this disaffected youth. He wants to give lads like them a hearing and give some higher meaning to their scrawl, as he puts it. He wants to make a call to Britain and to all nations made in the name of love, for peace's sake. The entire poem can be viewed as a kind of perverse love letter, a love letter addressed to the disaffected youth, to the downtrodden working class, to the lonely and the forgotten souls. It's worth remembering that much of the poem's impact came from the fact that it was banned from the airwaves for so long. The prudish moral guardians who campaigned to have the poem banned actually ended up creating an air of mystery and interest around the poem, which prompted a curious reading public, of course, to go out and buy the poem in the Book of Poetry. It would be naive, in all honesty, to think that it was merely the swear words and racial epithets that the conservative establishment objected to. No, I think really the most dangerous element of the poem, in their eyes, was the working class anger, or perhaps even more dangerously, the working class hope. Well, that little analysis was just a tip of the iceberg for this brilliant, complex, and lengthy poem. As I mentioned before, I actually did a reading of the entire poem. It took me ages. The link is in the description, so feel free to have a little listen. Again, if you've got 20 odd minutes to spare, have a listen to me reading the poem. Apologies for the accent. I'm not from Leeds or Yorkshire. I'm from the northeast of England, but I think it's, at least I'm northern, it's fairly close. If you've got any thoughts or any questions about the poem, just ask me in the comments. I don't mind answering them. I love talking about and appreciating poetry, so I'll happily answer any questions you might have. I don't mind helping you with your essays. Thanks for listening today. I'll probably do more of these poetry analysis soon. If you like that sort of thing, feel free to like and subscribe. Again, thanks for watching, and goodbye.